I'm Kamal Santa Maria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, who will save Egypt's economy? The new interim Prime Minister is a financial man, but there's a lot of work to do to bring Egypt's failing economy and youth unemployment under control. Also this week, 0-hour contracts, where being employed means you don't technically need to work, but worse still, you don't necessarily get paid. Is Britain masking the true nature of unemployment by changing the rules? Plus, gold miners in South Africa demanding an end to slave wages as gold prices plummet. Are their demands unrealistic? So we're starting this week with a look at two struggling Middle Eastern economies. Struggling for two different reasons, though. One is, of course, Syria, its economy essentially strangled by over 2 years of war. And we'll look at an example of how that has manifested itself in just a moment. But we start in Egypt, which is apparently a country too big to fail, if you remember that phrase. That's at least the thinking of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, who are pledging billions of dollars for Egypt to underpin its economy. Because during his year in power, the ousted President Morsi never really got round to fixing that. This report from our correspondent, who we are not naming for her safety, on what happens next with Egypt's economy.
Many Egyptians are fasting from sunrise to sunset during the holy month of Ramadan. For millions of people, it's a struggle to feed their families all year round. Long before the revolution 2 years ago, poverty in Egypt was chronic. The economy has been in free fall ever since, and the poorest are getting desperate. Ahmed Hassan has come to a Ramadan tent run by a charity to break his fast. He works at a juice bar, but says his shifts are becoming scarce and the income gap is widening.
As you can see from the way I am dressed, I am a normal person. I am not a really poor one. But I am facing hard times. I'm wondering, how can I live without a job, shelter or any opportunities while others work for big companies, live in big houses and earn big salaries?
For years, almost half the population were surviving on less than $2 a day. Critics say things only became worse under ousted President Morsi. Tourism has declined, foreign investors are looking elsewhere, and foreign currency reserves are low. For people here, that means a lack of jobs and rising prices.
The main issue affecting the poor is the fact that inflation is so high. It's been at unsustainably high levels for as long as I've covered Egypt, which is more than 20 years. Core inflation is now running, I think, around 11%. As I've said, food price inflation is running between 13 and 15%, but some food prices are running higher than that year on year. That is absolutely unsustainable for a poor country.
Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait have offered $12 billion in aid. And amidst the current political crisis, a former finance minister, El-Beblawi, has been named interim prime minister. For now, the country remains deeply divided and crime and violence have spiked as a result. While much of the focus is on maintaining stability, the economy is unlikely to make a speedy recovery. People like Hassan say they still have their dignity.
I don't want to be a thief. I want to live normally. If I see a woman like you, I don't want to run after her and steal her bag, like most people do these days.
Ramadan is usually a time for family and goodwill. This year, for millions of Egyptians, it is just another month of hoping the next is better.
Well, let's get more into the economics of Egypt now. You saw him there in Jane's report. Joining us from Cairo, Angus Blair, who is the president of the economic think tank, the Signet Institute. And Angus, I'd like to look first at the appointment of the interim prime minister, who was the finance minister. What do you make of that move? Is it a concerted one to put someone who's less political, more focused on the financial, to fix the economy?
Yes, we are familiar with other people who seem to have been offered the job or were in discussions to take this position. But I like El-Beblawi. I came in as a skeptic when he was initially Minister of Finance, but left when I saw him and met him really impressed. I would call him almost a tiger. He knows what's wrong with Egypt economically. He wants to sort it out. I think he'll take brave decisions, and even that this is an interim government, he'll put people of competence around him, but really focus on boosting the economy. And I think that's imperative, because at economic growth of about 2% per annum, Egypt needs to get that growth up about 3 times that amount, about 6% per annum, to really feed down onto the street. So I like him. I like his energy. I like his drive. I like his focus, and I think he'll be pretty good. And as I've said, it's important. I think he'll put very good people of competence around him.
Because arguably, Angus, this is where the government of the ousted President Mohamed Morsi should have started. Any interview I've done on Egypt or Tunisia or Libya or anything like that, I always make the point that this is where these crises started: unemployment and stagnant economies.
Yeah, the economy is key at any point. It was key in terms of the initial uprising in 2011, because even though there'd been some years of over 6% growth, amongst the highest in the world, it wasn't trickling down fast enough. And of course there was the issue of corruption as well. But in terms of the economy, I think the major criticism of the Morsi administration is the utter lack of competency of the individuals involved. The fact that there wasn't an real economic plan, certainly no creative economic plan. They made some proposals to increase taxes, but in an environment that was pretty poor and sentiment bad. It wasn't going to make sentiment any better by raising taxes. So I think that the economy is central to anything to do with progress in Egypt, and I think that sorting out the macroeconomy, particularly foreign exchange reserves, having stability, focusing on improving domestic investment first, then foreign direct investment, is key.
OK, on that point, let's widen it out and look at the regional impact here. You have got Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who have both stepped up and pumped a whole lot of cash into Egypt. Can you explain for our viewers why they're doing that, what advantage there is for those countries to get involved in Egypt?
Well, there's about $8 billion between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, and allegedly now, reportedly, around $4 billion from Kuwait. It's interesting here. I think, first of all, is supporting a friendly state to them that needs help. The fact that on a macroeconomic level, Egypt's in a very difficult position. Generally, there are other positives in the economy, a lot of liquidity and so on, but let's look at the top. Foreign exchange reserves down to about 2 months' cover. Egypt needs breathing space to be able to sort out its economy and then induce confidence. The supply of capital, first of all, from Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and from Kuwait, is definitely helping. Now, Qatar has done that historically in the last year, tried to help support Egypt. But at that time, the relations between the Muslim Brotherhood government and other GCC states were pretty poor. And the end result is that now the administration is gone, there's different political balance, or at least in terms of willingness to support Egypt. I think these states were already willing to support Egypt, but were wary of doing so under the administration, I think partly because, or if not the major part of it, because of the levels of competency in running the economy. And I think now that the economy is going to be key now to change, amongst other issues, then I think the other states within the GCC have stepped up and are willing to help Egypt.
That is Angus Blair talking Egypt with us on Counting the Cost this week. Thank you very much, Angus. And now to Syria, where years of fighting has pushed up the prices of basic goods, just everyday things, food and fuel. And a major factor is the depreciation of the local currency. Syrian pounds lost 80% of its value since the conflict began. But there's another problem too. The data which was coming out of Syria even before the conflict began was pretty unreliable. So we don't have a real picture of the economy, other than to say that it is a war economy. And as El-Beblawi reports now from Aleppo, businesses and traders have been forced to find new ways to get by.
It is no longer a profitable business. Only few can afford to buy gold. Nowadays, Syrians sell their gold to survive. That is why Shadi Al-Obeidi decided to work in currency trading. It is a growing business in rebel-held areas. Some Syrians have been buying dollars to preserve the value of their money.
Every day the pound is losing value. People are panicking. Even during one day the price fluctuates, and it's hard to find dollars in the market.
The Syrian pound is losing its value. A dollar was worth about 47 pounds before the uprising began over 2 years ago. It's now at least 315 pounds. And nowhere is that clear than in this wholesale market in Aleppo City. Prices of basic goods, many of them now imported, are on the rise.
Because of the pound's exchange rate, prices of commodities, including fuel, are increasing. Traders are not helping. They are trying to make profit by stocking subsidized goods.
When the local currency dipped to a record low a few weeks ago, the government said it would increase salaries for state employees and the military. But because of inflation and the low value of the pound, that increase will mean little to most Syrians.
The government is benefiting from this situation, and it is doing nothing to stabilize the pound, because it wants the people to hate the rebels.
The government has said it would take measures to help support the pound, and it also referred to support from what it said were friendly countries. But that was weeks ago, and the pound hasn't stabilized.
Many people who live in rebel-controlled territories are poor to begin with. The war has made their living conditions even worse. Speak to people here, and all they talk about is their struggle to survive. And they're worried that the economic situation is only going to get worse, and that the value of the Syrian pound will decline against the US dollar even further.
Already people are selling their personal belongings to survive. This temporary market is where they go to put on display anything of value. The United Nations says 4 million Syrians, a fifth of the population, are unable to produce or buy enough food. And with the pound in a free fall, there will be more Syrians in need. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Aleppo.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, a call to end slave wages in South Africa's gold mining industry. We take a look at the demands as union rivalry rocks the industry. Now to a new phenomenon in employment, or underemployment if you like. 0-hour contracts. It's now estimated more than 300,000 people in the UK are on such contracts, ones which essentially keep workers on standby and deny them regular hours and basic employment rights. Lawrence Lee explores that.
The British economy is flat. Economic recovery here has taken longer to arrive than after any recession since records began. Wages have stayed flat too, which means they've fallen in real terms. Jobs are few and far between. Stories abound of 1,000 or 2,000 people applying for the same post. Those conditions seem to have created an opportunity for employers to change the rules by creating a completely different model of working. What the 0 hours contract represents is essentially the diametric opposite of the job for life which has traditionally existed in many European countries. If you sign a 0 hours contract, it says that you're available as and when your employer needs you. That may be 50 hours one week, it may be 20 hours, or it may be nothing at all. What you do by signing one is to give away your rights to guaranteed work. If you think these contracts are for menial jobs only, then think again. This woman's on one. She's a college lecturer.
Well, in my department, there are easily about 14 or 15 people on these 0 hours contracts, and they outweigh the number of people on secure contracts.
And have you worked out how much you earn against the people who are on secure contracts?
It's half or less than half for the same job, but for more hours. We are doing more hours than those on secure contracts.
And being paid half?
Yeah.
And that's because you're paid by the hour rather than a salary?
Yes. The way they work it out, they've done it very, very cleverly. It's weighted in favour of the employer. Everything that you do, your admin duties, your teaching, marking, preparation and planning, they will take you a lot longer than you think when you first look at that hourly pay rate. And one of my colleagues says, I feel like I'm on an apprenticeship wage sometimes.
Construction, care homes, restaurants, coffee shops, universities. 0 hours contracts have taken off in any number of places. Restaurant staff have told stories of being summoned to work and then told to wait outside unpaid until some customers arrive. Unions say it's completely degrading.
It is exploitative of employers. They have a duty of mutual trust and confidence towards their staff, as indeed their staff have a duty to make sure that they deliver their end of the bargain. And if you're not offering anything, if you're there just at the beck and call, employers not providing sickness, absence policies, not providing pensions, indeed not even providing pay terms and conditions while you're sitting waiting to be called, is really a retrograde step.
The increasing prevalence of 0 hours contracts also explains something that's confused economists here. Why, given such bad economic conditions, has unemployment not risen? The answer seems to be that Britain isn't so much unemployed nowadays as underemployed. And without pension rights or other benefits attached to traditional contracts, there are profound implications to the 0 hours contract.
One of the dangers for 0 hours contracts is that in some cases, and it's not for all 0 hours contracts, workers won't be given the same entitlements to pensions and particularly training, and that has some implications. For the UK economy, it's actually potentially a bad thing because workers often don't get the training they need. So these 0 hours contract jobs can become dead-end jobs of which it's hard to escape. And actually, if workers aren't being trained, that's bad for the performance of the economy overall.
Of course, the view from the world of the employer isn't anything like as gloomy. They say that 0 hours contracts offer flexibility in favour of people who might want to juggle things like work and childcare. Certainly, they also offer a great deal of flexibility to employers. They're able to see workers as a cost, which can be reduced if need be.
Well, as well as cost cutting, I think the main advantage is flexibility. You know, you as an employer have a fluctuating need for employees, and with these types of contracts, it's really, you know, you can put out the work when you've got it, but you're not paying out for staff when you haven't got the work.
They're certainly straightforward. Do a web search for the name, and the first thing that pops up is a do-it-yourself contract for employers, which you can buy for $25. It's that sense of cheapness, the lack of value attached to labour, that's worrying some government ministers here who are investigating whether the system's being abused by unscrupulous employers. But their rise looks to be part of the long-term legacy of the UK's historic downturn.
All right, let's get some more on this with Richard Excel. He is the Senior Policy Officer at the Trade Union Congress in the United Kingdom, and we thank you for your time. These contracts are either flexible or draconian, depending on which side of the contract you sit. Now, our reporter outlined an example there of the waiters and the kitchen staff asked to come to work, but they're not allowed onto the premises until the actual customers arrive. How on earth does that work?
Well, and the idea is that you're contracted to be available whenever your employer calls you out, but you've no guaranteed hours of work. In fact, I was hearing from a member of Parliament yesterday whose son had been stuck on a 0 hours contract where he might get 20 hours work 1 week, none the next. And it means that you've got no security of income, that you can't plan your week, you might be called out at any moment. It doesn't leave you free to go for other jobs. So for a lot of people, it's a very stressful experience.
Is it just, and I hate to be defeatist here, but is it just part of reality now? The UK has been in this unemployment hole for a while now, and maybe this is just part of the adjustment.
No, it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, we've got to emphasise that 0 hours contracts, although they're growing, they're still only a fairly small part of the UK labour market. I mean, we have a big labour market in the UK, 30 million people in the world of work, and there's probably about 250,000 people on 0 hours contracts. But it is growing, so we have to take some sort of action. And one of the reforms that we're quite interested in is requiring employers to guarantee a minimum number of hours a week. We think that would be quite fair, while still allowing some of the flexibility that they value.
Is there also a way to regulate them so that we don't get the more unscrupulous employers out there taking real advantage of people?
Well, that's it. Ideally, we'd like to see the government, which is looking into the issue at the moment, we'd like to see the conclusion of that investigation being that we get some regulations requiring employers to guarantee a minimum number of hours a week for workers on contracts like this.
Now, our reporter also pointed out that unemployment has not risen with the introduction of 0 hours. Now, I know you said they're only a small part of the job scene, but are they sort of massaging the numbers a wee bit?
Maybe a little. One thing that we're very, very clear on is that no one on job seekers allowance, that's the main benefit for unemployed people, should be told that they've got to take a 0 hours contract or lose their benefit. The 0 hours contracts don't offer people security of income, and it's unfair to force unemployed people into that, where they might actually be worse off than they are on benefits.
And is this a phenomena, to your knowledge, which is spreading beyond the UK? given how bad unemployment is in other parts of Europe.
It does exist in some other countries. In fact, 0 hours contracts became a big thing in the Netherlands before they came to the UK. So, yes, it's not just a British issue.
That is Richard Exel from the Trade Union Congress. Thank you for your time. In South Africa, mining is back in the news. It's the gold sector, where the unions are demanding sharp increases in pay, up to 150% in some cases. But mining executives say it's all unrealistic. Gold prices have slumped, so there just aren't the profits coming out of the ground to pay more for those working it. Tanya Page reports from Johannesburg.
These miners want the government to pay their legal fees. Their lawyer hasn't been paid for representing them at the Commission of Inquiry into the deaths of 44 people at the Lonmin Platinum Mine last year, most of whom were shot dead by police. A series of illegal strikes fueled by union rivalry had hit the mining industry. Now the same unions are starting to negotiate with gold mining company executives for higher wages. The National Union of Mine Workers represents most gold workers. It wants their basic salary increased by 60% to 8,000 Rand a month or $800.
Anything below 8,000, it's just unacceptable. It's slavery a wage.
But the talks will be hostile because for the first time they'll include the more aggressive Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, or AMCU, which is demanding a 150% increase.
The unions are competing for members, so they'll try to outmaneuver each other. But there's a lot at stake politically too. President Jacob Zuma needs the support of unions which help him govern to deliver votes for his African National Congress at next year's election.
The Deputy President has been leading efforts to calm the miners. He wants the unions and mining companies to sign an agreement that encourages peaceful protest and rebuilds trust. But the AMCU hasn't signed it yet.
Government's not fully woken up yet. They haven't committed enough resources, and they haven't done anything to show they've got the resolve to enforce our Constitution.
Mining company executives have already warned the union's demands are unrealistic for an industry which has shed thousands of jobs because of the strikes, soaring costs and a falling gold price. But for the miners here, the fight for a fair deal is far from over.
Now, food security is often a thorny issue and is certainly raising some concerns in the United States over Chinese investment in the country. Now, there was first the Chinese meat company Shanhui International, which is planning to buy the world's biggest pork manufacturer, Smithfield Foods. And also a number of Chinese companies are now investing in US land. John Hendren has that story.
In plain-talking Missouri, they have a name for people who want to let the Chinese buy American farmland.
I think they're traitors. They're traitors to the consumer, they're traitors to the farmers, they're traitors to the people of Missouri.
People here can't stop China's Shanhui International from buying Smithfield Foods, supplier of a quarter of the world's pork. But Missouri, like several other states, has banned foreigners from owning the farmland beneath the pigs' feet. Casey Guernsey tried to change that. The Missouri legislator wrote a line in a state farm bill that would have let foreigners own up to 1% of Missouri land. He says the current law lets foreigners buy through U.S. subsidiaries anyway.
The bottom line is the statute does not work. It's not a statute that's effective. It's not going to change any business proposal or any purchase of farmland right now.
He was vilified. The governor vetoed the bill. It didn't matter that less than 2% of U.S. farmland and less than 1% of Missouri's is already foreign-owned. Here in the American Midwest, farmland is considered a national treasure. It was fought over during the Civil War, and now the prospect of losing control of the land that feeds much of the world has many here in a fighting mood again.
We should be in control of our land, and land is something that many of us in this country feel is a sacred thing and something that's kind of a birthright for us citizens.
So for now, Chinese investors can own Smithfield's pork, but the road to foreign ownership of the land itself is still long and winding.
And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/business. The latest business headlines are there, plus all of our previous episodes for you to catch up on. And then you can get in touch as well. You can tweet me at KamalAJE, our business editor at Abid Oliver Ali, or drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santa Maria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.